Hello everyone, welcome back to another session on methodology of literature. In the previous video, I just named the different periods in modern English literature. So before we discuss the different periods in modern English literature, I would like to brief about the history of England and some references to history of Europe. Just few references, and I'll not get into the details of the history of Europe. That is beyond the scope of our study, at least for the time being. For your understanding, let's first locate where is England. Okay, we'll start from the very base. In the world map, let's locate where is England. Why I am saying this is that it is only by understanding the historical, geographical, societal and political structure of England that we will have a better understanding of the literature of that particular country. Do agree that the psychological aspects are important. It has got a tremendous impact on the writer, but the writer always stands in his milieu. So that is the relevance of the study of history of Britain. You can see here, this is the world map. In that you can locate, you can see England over here. So in Europe, the northwestern side, you can locate England, Britain or present day UK. Okay, so that is about the mapping, or you can say locating England in the world map. So coming back to our topic, according to historians, the first settlement in England happened about 9 million years ago. Okay, and in history we can also see an invasion of England by the Romans in AD 43, and this Roman rule continued to almost you can say 5th century AD. There is also a reference to Celts in England, okay, especially in the northern regions of England. Okay, Celts are a particular group of Indo-European people. Their geographical origin is quite disputed, but they spread all over Europe at one particular point in history. For the time being, this Roman invasion in AD 43 and the presence of Celts in England, we leave all those things behind, because what is more important to us is the Anglo-Saxon invasion of England somewhere in the 5th century AD. The real history of England begins from there. The Anglo-Saxon invasion of England is basically the migration of 3 tribal groups from the present day Germany and you can say Denmark to England. Okay, the 3 Germanic tribal groups. Germanic tribal groups are Angles, Saxons and Jutes. They pose a major impact on England, its culture, its political structure, its society from the 5th century AD. So that is why we consider the 5th century AD in general as the period of invasion of 3 Germanic tribes by name Angles, Saxons and Jutes. They have come from Jutland, Anglia and Saxon coast. We cannot say like they are from Germany just because they were Germanic tribes. Okay, I keep aside all the debates and controversies related to the concept of nation for the time being, which I might take up later in some other video, especially when we discuss about the post-colonial scenario. And in this particular video, I use the term nation in more or less a generic sense. So coming back to history, the 3 different Germanic groups settled at 3 different regions. The Angles, they more or less settled in the northeastern region of Northumbria, etc. The Saxons somewhere in the middle region, or you can say like southwest region, okay, in and around the Wessex region. And Jutes, they settled in the southern region in 2 small pockets, near Kent and all. Another feature that we have to look into in this context is the features of these 3 tribes. How exactly it has contributed to England or the literature of that particular period. The first common feature that we can identify in these 3 tribes is that they don't have a common religion. Okay, they might be practicing some Germanic religion, old Germanic religion, okay, but they don't have any common religion. Secondly, they don't have any common language. They might belong to one common language family, okay, but they don't have a common language, the three different tribes. And thirdly, even their cultural practices were different. So that is all about the part that you have to remember with regard to the history of England, that is the Anglo-Saxon invasion. Okay, now we get into the second part in the history of England, and that is the arrival of Christianity to England. We don't know how and when Christianity reached England for the first time, but you can see that the Celts in the northern region, especially in the Wales, Celtic and Ireland region, they were practicing Christianity. And the three new tribal groups that has entered into the mainland of England, like the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, they were not practicing Christianity. And you can see somewhere in the 6th century AD, through Romans, Christianity entered into England for a second time. And in this third coming of Romans, the first was in BC, 4th or 5th century BC. Some history books referred to as the first arrival of Romans into the mainland of England. The second one, as I have told you earlier, that was in AD 43, and this is like the third one in the 6th century AD. In the 6th century arrival of Romans to England, they have contributed three things to England. First one, they have given Christianity to England. Secondly, they have given a language to England. And thirdly, through Christianity, they have given sacredness to kingship in England. Now you might be wondering how exactly Christianity gave language to England. You can see that the letters that we use in English alphabet or in English are basically Roman letters. So that is why there is a kind of a fixation you can see in language during this particular period. It wasn't complete. The language of England evolved through years, but you can say they have contributed to the language of England. So if I summarize, the first one, Anglo-Saxon invasion in the 5th century AD. Another important event in the history of England is the arrival of Christianity in the 6th century AD. From 9th century AD to 12th century AD, you can see this is like the period of holy wars in Europe. Okay, so the repercussions of that you can see even in England. The whole of Europe during this particular period was under the supervision of the Holy Roman Empire. And almost all writings from Europe during this period are either chivalric or religious. During the Holy War period, the boundaries of nations were porous. So the third most important event in the history of England is the Norman Conquest of 1066. It is also called as the Battle of Hastings. Normans were a group of people. Normans were a group of people from France under the leadership of Duke William of Normandy. They attacked England. When the ruler speaks French, as he is from France, it will have a tremendous impact on English as a language. And this strong influence of French is one of the reasons behind the development of a separate Middle English period from the Old English period. Hence, the major consequences of Norman conquest are: first one, England's relation with the Scandinavian countries got cut off. Secondly, the nation came under the influence of French culture, and thereby the country has got three different languages at the same time. One, the Norman French language, which was the language of the aristocracy. Two, Latin, the language of the educated people. And three, English spoken by the common Englishmen. The third characteristic of Norman conquest is that England was given a new Norman French king and ruling class. The fourth characteristic is that the country was reorganized into or has become a strong feudal state, and this particular phenomenon has its repercussions in the society of England from then on. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Europe has witnessed its renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth, as you all know. This is also called as Dark Ages in the history of Europe. During the period, Europe gradually moved out of the clutches of religion, particularly the orthodoxy of the Roman Catholicism. And hence the period, according to some historians who are in favor of the space of religion, is called as Dark Ages. The Renaissance began in Italy, the seat of Catholicism, and it gradually moved throughout Europe. England was the last nation to pick up the fire of Renaissance. So the general characteristics of the period are, why I am explaining this has an impact even on the literature of the period, and hence the general characteristics are, first one, the skepticism towards religion, which you can say in fact resulted in Reformation and later the birth of Protestantism. Okay. The second characteristic is the spread of education, which means the education was made available more or less to every section of the society, which was in a way a blow to the religious authorities who claimed that it is their sole authority to interpret Bible, read and interpret Bible, which had a definite influence on the power relations of the time. Okay, and the third characteristic of Renaissance period is the renewed interest in classical antiquity. And the fourth characteristic is the rise of humanist philosophy. In humanist philosophy, there is a belief in self, human worth, and individual identity. The radical changes in ideas cannot be restricted to religion. It is even extended to politics and also science. This often gets reflected in the literature of the time. So you can say the radical changes along with many social and political contexts resulted in the emergence of kingship in England. The list of rulers is quite long. We are just giving a brief introduction to history of England. So we don't have time to discuss about each and every ruler, but we cannot leave out some rulers. And one among them is King Henry VIII. So, in the first video of history of England, I have discussed three main points. First one, the Anglo-Saxon invasion of England in the 5th century AD. Okay. And second one, the Norman Conquest or the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. And thirdly, we have discussed the Renaissance, its aftermath, and emergence of kingship in England. So that is all for today. Till we meet in another video, stay at home and stay safe. Thank you. God bless.